What is going on, YouTube? It's Tyler from Mission VR, where it's my mission to bring you guys good quality VR content. Today's video, we've been talking about VR games for as long as I can remember on this channel. It's my favorite thing about VR is playing new games and experiencing what the experiences have to offer. I love doing the game reviews, but we've had kind of a lackluster year when it comes to VR games, and there are some nice quality VR titles that we do know are coming, and some big things happening in VR when it comes to competition for the Quest, number one. And number two, really the biggest thing I think that's going to benefit VR is the PlayStation VR 2, because we all know the PlayStation VR 1 sold a ton of copies, and the PSVR 2 is going to sell probably the same amount of copies, and it's going to have some high-level games that are going to be able to go with it, that are going to be capable of running on the PS5, which means we're going to get some actual high quality VR games. And we already do have one of those announced, and that is Horizon VR Call of the Mountain. And based on the trailer, it looks pretty good. But today's video, I really want to preference, there's some things that VR developers do that, as a VR gamer and somebody who's super passionate about the future of VR gaming and somebody who actively fights people all the time on it is the future, when you get all these people say it's still arcadey and gimmicky, I fight these people all the time because it drives me nuts, because all I do is play VR, because I see so much potential and how insanely immersed it can make you. But VR game developers typically, sometimes they do things that, will take you out of the experience. So today we're going to talk about how can VR games get better in really three major areas that I think need to be focused on in all VR games moving forward. Guys, with that being said, please do drop a like on this video, subscribe to my channel, go ahead, join the Discord server if you want to be part of a VR community. I sometimes do giveaways there, and I definitely will have some giveaways coming up here as the holiday season is around the corner. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop on into the first point I want to make about VR games. All right, so what separates a good VR game from a great VR game? And why are some VR games just absolutely better than other VR games? Let's look at games like Into the Radius, absolutely fantastic title. Population 1, absolutely fantastic title. Blade and Sorcery, absolutely fantastic title. What makes these games different than some of the other run-of-the-mill VR games that we've played? And I have some titles on here that I've played that I think are fantastic VR games. Until You Fall is a big one that doesn't get mentioned in that category very often, but Until You Fall on the surface is a really good game. Skyrim VR, obviously Quest users, you don't have access to this one, but Skyrim VR modded only, because not modded, it's an okay experience, but modded, it is a next level experience. So we're talking about a couple little things that can alter a VR experience to make it really next level and an experience you'll never forget. And the big one first, these guys right here, my hands aren't floating. Stop, please stop developing games with floating hands. I'm not saying that it's completely immersion breaking. Most games do very well, and it's okay with just the hands, but the hands are a big deal in VR. And I mean, as I started playing games with full arms and getting through those experiences, and then going to playing games with just floating hands, or God forbid, and most titles don't do this anymore, just the floating item now, where you have a controller and then it disappears when you pick something up. Thank God we got away from that, because that's really immersion breaking. But now even the floating hands are they can get by, and there'll be games that it's totally feasible and okay with, and it's not going to totally take you out of the experience. But the more you notice it, the more you realize that if you have full arms, it's like a back sub thought in there that you're more immersed into the game world. So VR game developers, I don't know. I don't know the intricacy of adding full arms. The way Population 1 did it was amazing, because you're not landlocked with your arms, where if my arm's longer than, my fiance's arms, if she put the headset on, it would stretch to her limit and it would stretch to my limit. So it makes sense that, that would be a good way to implement arms into games. Into the Radius does a really good job with that as well. I just finished playing Red Matter 2, full arms. I didn't even see my body. I didn't need to see the whole body. Just the arms are enough, because you're using your hands in VR so much. It's just a next level little experience thing that can really separate an experience from being a really good experience to being like, holy crap, I was really immersed in that title. So that's the first thing. So for the second point on VR games that I think is really important now and needs to be emphasized on games moving forward is absolutely some level of physics interaction in the game. And that really is kind of also centered around presence in the game. And I'll use Red Matter 2 because I just, reviewed that not that long ago as a great example of this. Not to say that there was crazy physics like a Blade and Sorcery where like everything bangs off everything and my sword enters, when I'm stabbing somebody, it goes in that exact spot, or I cut somebody's arm off, or this. That game is crazy physics driven, right? But Red Matter 2 is just enough where like if I were to bump this microphone with my hand in the VR world, or in the VR world, if I was walking past and I bumped a set of pots and pans, they would fall off the counter. It's a small thing, don't get me wrong. It's a tiny little thing, and it does require extra development time, but I can't say that my experience of Red Matter 2 wasn't incredible. I mean, just the absolute little things, from being able to clean a toilet in VR. And again, I know that that's a totally wasted game mechanic, really, for them to have added the ability for me to pick up a plunger and pick up the toilet seat in Red Matter. It's a waste of time. Or is it? No, it's a waste of time. I get that, but it's a next level little thing that adds so much presence to the game world. And one thing about VR is there is a lot of stuff going on with presence. If you can be present in the game world, more present in the game world, the experience is going to feel that much more real. And that's what's super important. So the extra little attention to details, and this is like for a game here, you're talking about Horizon VR Call of the Mountain, right? That game coming out, graphics look incredible, and graphics are a big part of VR. Don't get me wrong, no doubt about it. We all know that graphics are important. If the graphical experience sucks or there's a lot of screen door effect, it's not quite what it was in 2016 where you could get away with it because VR was so new. Now it's like you notice it and you're like, hey, there's better games with better graphics out there. So the graphics look great. That's all well and good. But like there's one scene in the trailer, and it's on screen now, but there's one scene in the trailer where he's moving the brush aside with his hand. And those little things like that, they add an incredible amount of presence to the game world, because now you feel like you are part of the world. And that is the whole point of VR. You want to feel part of the world. You want to feel like you're in it, you're there. So I think physics interactions are really important. And it's, melee combat games nowadays. Just finished reviewing Requisition VR, which is an upcoming zombie craftable survival game. It's got a lot going on for it. But right now it's only on PC VR, and I would definitely recommend waiting on that until it comes out on Quest and it's a little bit more of a fledged out experience, because it's still a little janky right now. But like that's a good example of a game that has some physics interactions to it, but it's just a janky physics interaction, which takes you out of the game world a little bit compared to like a Red Matter 2, which was insanely smooth. And a game that honestly I played and I was like, I put 8 hours in and it was like one of the better experiences I've ever had in VR. It's just that next level. And it makes you think about really what the future of some of these games, whenever they're able to really fully focus on them, and bring us these titles that are next level. It's gonna be awesome. But I think physical interaction and presence and all that is roped into one, the physics and the presence. It's really, really important, and it really can separate a title from going from good to great. And honestly, that's why Skyrim VR with all the mods, it adds full body. It adds, you can see your arms. You can, obviously in Skyrim, you can knock stuff over. The Bethesda game engine allows for, basically interacting with little everyday objects. And that's one of the reasons why Bethesda games were so popular, because you could just pick up a plate and just move it if you wanted to. It's a dumb little game mechanic, but it's the sense of presence. And in VR, the sense of presence is super, super important for a next level experience. And I think that's really, really important. So for our final point here, something I want to touch on with VR games need to definitely maybe take a little bit more, and they're mostly doing it now, but there are some games out there that still fall into some bad categories. But after playing a ton of, and we'll use Population 1 as an example, I play a lot of Population 1. I love the game. It's not, objectively, it's not the most beautiful game I've ever played. It doesn't have physics interactions of Population 1. So, it's already taken off some of that list, but it does have full body. I can see my full body, my arms. But this point is so important. Smoothness and natural feeling controls. This is something that you'd be surprised, as somebody who plays a lot of PC VR games. I've played a lot of games that don't have the most natural feeling controls. You can get by. It's still a good experience, no doubt. But the natural smoothness feeling of controls really can take you in or out of a world. And Population 1 not only just has smoothness of gameplay, which I think is also really important. Smoothness in a VR game this day and age is definitely a high level of importance. But part of that smoothness is the level of the smoothness of the controls and how natural they feel. Controls are really important. And any video game, people could talk about controls, but in VR, it's even more important because you can't see, you're not looking at a controller, you're not pressing buttons, you're grabbing and interacting with the world. So controls are really important. And, a lot of games will use the triggers to pick up objects, and that just isn't getting it done these days. It needs to be the grip button. The grip button feels more natural in, all that stuff. And I think Population 1's a really good example of a game that has not only an inventory system that's super smooth, but just an overall environment that's super smooth. The way you can climb, fly, build your way through the world, everything about it is just really, really smooth. And I think more games need to, not be as clunky in VR. And it's not exactly as easy as said than done, but it is important. And I think that that's right now a big thing for VR, where it needs to be focused on is smoothness and the natural feeling of controls. Some other games that I've played that are generally pretty smooth would have been, actually, believe it or not, Blade and Sorcery is really smooth, provided you're not on a modded map with a bunch of lagging going on. But if you're on just like regular Blade and Sorcery, or playing a good level mod, the game's pretty damn smooth for having all the physical interactions. And I think that that's why it has the popularity that it does, because it feels so good. And precisely why Skyrim VR is actually one of the best VR games ever made, but with the mods. And I shouldn't say made, because Skyrim obviously was before VR, but Skyrim VR is one of the better VR games you can play because of the mods, if you end up having the mods. But there's some really good VR games that are out there, and I'm definitely excited for more future really good VR games. But I think that it's important that developers start taking a serious approach to VR games that isn't just about the story or the IP, right? And I've said it for a while, if you want to really bring people into VR, some of these bigger IPs need to start coming to VR with full-fledged out experiences, not like Star Wars Tales of Galaxy's Edge. Not a bad experience. I think it's a good game overall, but just because it has a Star Wars IP doesn't mean they're going to sell headsets. A big one would be like a Call of Duty, and I'm talking a full-fledged out Call of Duty game, the title, the whole 9 yards backed behind it, with the right controls, smoothness, graphics, the whole 9 yards. That's going to sell headsets. And I think that that's what's important, is we need to get more people to buy these headsets so we can get better games. And developers are starting to definitely figure out, compared to 2016, the controls and all this stuff was unheard of. Nobody even knew what they were developing. Where now I think we're starting to get a more clear picture of what needs to be developed in these games so that it makes sense and it feels good, it feels right, it feels like a complete experience, and really can separate your game from being a good VR game to go all the way up to, wow, that was one of the best VR games I've ever played. Well, guys, that is it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please do drop a like on this video and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.